I'm going to move from funding and its discontents and stop talking about strategic plans, one of my great passions, and move into my true passion, which is talking with artists about ideas and the spaces that we have for speculating about alternate futures and ways of thinking about the passage and movement of ideas through time. And I'm going to take myself back to the art after an hour of funding, and I feel like it's a big glass of cold water and much needed. Look, it's such a privilege to be here as the curator of Encounters for Art Basel Hong Kong and to be curating my second edition, and it's been a really wonderful day today to watch audiences begin to come in and engage with the works of three of the 16 artists. Three of the artists out of the 16 projects I'm presenting are here today to speak with us. And watching audiences, and I've taken 3 tours today around their work, so I've done 3 hours of talking to each of their particular projects, and seeing the response of people has been absolutely energizing. It's been just so exciting, and I love this part of it where you get to meet the show and you get to meet the artists and you get to meet the ideas. Encounters, for those of you who are not aware, is one of 4 platforms for Art Basel across its 3 sectors: Switzerland, Miami, and Hong Kong, where institutional or museum or independent curators are invited to curate sectors of installations that present speculations and presentations of works that sit outside the confines of the booths and speak to institutional, museum, or public art practices. Encounters is quite distinct in the suite of Art Basel sectors. Basel in Switzerland has Unlimited, as you are all aware, with its own Kunsthalle space. They also have Parkour, which is the public artworks. What was that? Sorry? Oh, I thought you was. No, sorry. Art Basel Miami has public, which is outdoor works, but they have no indoor curated sector. And in Hong Kong, uniquely, Encounters is located across 4 meridians that divide the 2 floors of Art Basel Hong Kong. The conditions for Encounters are that I must select from proposals submitted by the galleries that are selected for Art Basel Hong Kong. So it's only once the galleries have been invited that the proposals can be submitted. I have extensive conversations with the galleries about artists, about ideas, about works that may work. The work in Encounters must use the full volume of the ceilings, which are high, up to 10 metres. We must use the sight lines. We can't build rooms. We can't close passage. We can't obstruct views. We can't disrupt the business of the fair. But we must present works that foreground risk experimentation and critical ideas at a different scale. And we must do all of this with a 40-hour install. Art Basel Hong Kong, unlike Unlimited, is installed over 4 weeks. Miami is installed over 3. Basel Hong Kong, the entire fair finds itself in this location after 72 hours, and all 16 of the Encounters installations are installed in 40 hours. So 5 p.m. on Sunday we started, 10 a.m. on Tuesday we finished, and then the fair opened. These 3 artists have all been absolutely remarkable in their commitment to Encounters this year. The principles for my Encounters this year were to think about what is an encounter. And there is a line from Milan Kundera which says, "A spark, a lightning flash, a random chance." The dictionary says it is to meet or to come upon, or to experience, especially by chance. And the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas describes an encounter as the shattering of indifference. And each of these artists works in a particular way to think through a situation in which an encounter may be transformative. Each of these artists, the title of this talk today is New Materialities, and in each of their works there is this very subjective space of encounter with the material of practice, and the way that they situate their works, not just as kind of propositions in location, but as actually cited and embodied works, has been rather remarkable to watch unfold. And particularly, I would like to, each of these artists were artists that I wanted to be included in Encounters, and I was very pleased that the galleries put them forward. So what I'm going to get them to do today is speak to you about the ideas that underpin the development of their work for Art Basel Encounters, and then through that to speak a little bit about the concerns that have underpinned their practice through time. I'm just going to go left to right. I can't remember what I sent you on the briefing notes originally, and we are just going to have a chat at a certain point. My left. Not your left. But you're probably right. But look, I'm going to begin. What was that? I'm going to start with you, Brooke Andrew.
Hello.
Hi. Brooke Andrew is an artist I've known for 20 years. We're which ages me, actually. But we first met with a practice that has a really compelling thesis that examines the space of identity, place, and state upon the ways in which we think through the politics of representation and subjectivity. And by that I mean that, the personal is political for Brooke. And I'm so interested, I wanted him to be a part of Art Basel Encounters, and I began speaking with his galleries, Nathalie Obadia in Paris and Tolano Galleries this time last year, about a site-specific work that would address directly the situation and circumstances of encounters as a meeting point at a crossroads in Hong Kong. And the work that Brooke has created is called Building, in brackets, Eating Empires. It's the first time an Indigenous artist has been commissioned to create a work for a curated sector in the 47 years of Art Basel's history. And Brooke's heritage is a mixture of Scottish and Wiradjuri and also Ngunnawal country. Yes, which is your mother's country as well. So both those are your mother's country. And Brooke's Assembly, Building, Eating Empires, is the premier work on level 3 at the entrance of 3C. Will you speak a bit to the development of that work, Brooke?
Sure. I mean, as Alexie said, I'm very interested in identity and, of course, colonialism. I mean, Australia, like many countries of the world, has this really rich identity and complex identity. It's not fixed, and it's something that I've always strove for in my practice to, I suppose, sit these kind of experiences alongside other international places that maybe are more visible and more part of the dominant kind of narrative. And often people, if they don't know about Australia, they don't often know about these kind of complex histories and engagements. And so, for this work, it was really about creating it was an opportunity to create something that was large-scale, immersive. I mean, many museums don't have ceilings that are 8 metres, 9, 10 metres tall. And I really want to, the whole idea of working with archival, material is something really important, especially for my family, because on my mother's side, who's Wiradjuri, Ngunnawal and Scottish, I mean, we don't have, photos of her family because of colonisation, because of the history of ethnography. And unfortunately, anthropologists weren't necessarily in that part of, my mother's region. And so on my father's side, of course, we have a lot more photos. So we're really talking about memory, cultural amnesia, the policies of segregation and assimilation. So these are kind of more the kind of personal things that have affected my family and how I work in the world. And so, for this building, Eating Empire was kind of really engaging in the kind of Asia-Pacific, area. Instead of engaging with, for example, Spanish colonial, British colonial, French colonial aspects of my practice, which I am also working with the Musée de Branly at the moment on that kind of project. But this one was really kind of close to my heart because it meant that people, us here, can, be alongside the historical context of this part of the world, which is both, kind of romantic and political and social and complex. Yeah.
I mean, I think something that I'm trusting and I'm hoping that you've had a chance to have at least a quick look at the encounters, but this work is a mise-en-scene of several components of images lifted from really the paralleling of photography to the rise and expansion of the empire. And as the colonies moved and proliferated, photography was a form of documenting and creating souvenirs in a sense of passage and time. And for 15 years, Brooke has been working with the Cambridge University Archive, and Brooke has an intensive practice of working with archives to rethink the places of the kind of occlusions, the blockages of history, the kind of points at which we can contest or rethink the spaces in which dominant narratives can be destabilised and alternate perspectives can be put forward. And Brooke is often called upon to do on behalf of institutions a little bit of dirty work and speak to the unspoken. He curated a show for the Museum of Contemporary Art in Sydney called Taboo. He worked on a show for the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney looking at censorship. And your work does touch on those thresholds of the things that we would otherwise and sometimes seek to subjugate, and the bits of the past that have the capacity to keep on coming forward even as we move into another future. Can you speak a bit to that process?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a tough process because, who am I to speak for other people? And, we even have that within my own family context. How can you speak beyond your own experience? But I think it's the passion that drives me is the connections or the invisibility, the lack of understanding of what is the Australian Asia-Pacific context in a dominant kind of Western European narrative, which is often kind of scoffed at. And it's this which I find really interesting. It's kind of being on the edge of something, which I feel like I am anyway, being from a mixed cultural background. I think that lots of people are of the planet and the world, and the idea of capitalism or new media, we kind of all have to be the same. And I know that these are kind of conversations that we've all been having, but there's a kind of a sense of intimate reality for that. And the work I work with the Reina Sophia's collection and also the Museum of America's collection and the Anthropological Museum there too. And my task, which was very interesting, was to somehow look at the kind of the legacy of the Spanish colonial aspect and its relationship with the Americas, and compare that to the British Australian experience. And that was a bit nerve-wracking because here I am going into this other place and kind of juxtaposing my own archives with the archives of these museums, with artists like Diego Rivera, and it's a complex kind of smash together, but it wasn't a smash. It was a deliberate kind of juxtaposition to tease out different ways of looking at history, and so I think that it's that aspect is what I think really drives me, and I think that it's not just about it's so easy to kind of pick an image out of an archive and blow it up. I just wanted to, in this work, it's about putting us inside a theatre of history.
And you and I spoke very much about that mise-en-scene and about using the circumstances of the encounter space, those sites, those volumes, that approach, to deeply embed the viewer in a context of complicity, and to be aware that they are surrounded by things that move through time and to which they are directly or indirectly connected. And I think, in that work as well, that you and I spoke about not having pristine cuts to the figures themselves, that there is a sense of collage or dada that exists at cut and paste, and also the reversal on the backs of some of the Wiradjuri shield design, which in this context speaks more to a kind of art world, more, fluently versed in the vocabularies of op or conceptual or hard-edged geometric sort of practices, rather than the kind of ancient arts of wood carving and shield carving with the country your ancestors come from. Yeah,
I think that's really interesting. So that if you've seen the work, it's the black and white kind of pop design. You've probably seen African art. Even in Chanel, all the big brands, it's the diamond within diamond, the chevron design, the zigzag designs. In contemporary camouflage, there's this design is being used in war machines. But these are very ancient kind of traditions, and it's about how that becomes the centre of contemporary art, because often, as we know, African or Indigenous or other artists or people with mixed heritage were kind of pushed to the side, or you're kind of okay, you're this, and therefore you're kind of romanticised, or I don't know. It's a very complex thing, and I'm in Paris at the moment having these conversations with people at the Musée de Quai Branly who are very open, but there is clearly this idea about primitivism or about these designs being pushed to the edge. But the interesting thing for me about subverting this is that this traditional design, which is used carved on trees for dendroglyphs, they're called, for ceremony or burial sites, and also on shields, is that the op or pop aspect of them, it becomes like its own form of optical illusion to kind of talk to, well, what is the real, or what is the past, and what is the present.
And I think within that, that's a good moment to move potentially on to those points of where do you actually get to see and what is unseen and what is spoken and what is unspoken, to move to Tintin Wulia. Tintin I've known for 10 years. She's an Indonesian-born but Australian-based. She lives between Australia and Indonesia, but based in Brisbane at the moment. She was living in Melbourne, where I was living for a period of time, and we've become very good friends over the years, and I really love Tintin's practice. I think each of these artists up here on the stage, each of their works deals in some way with an alternate or sort of a way of rethinking the dominant histories or narratives of places, and how you can actually either create a literal or a subjective or a speculative space for encounter, and how people operate in simultaneous places in time and space. And research is a very strong current that underpins the breadth of Tintin's work and has over many years. I mean, the notion of borders and segregation and, in fact, understanding the kind of unspoken riptides and currents that create a connectivity is something that's very significant. The project we're presenting here is actually 5 tons of homes and other understories, is a 4-year project, and this is only one stop. It's sort of halfway through. This is the midway of an evolving project, and this project has been developing from Tintin's conversations largely in this context with Filipino domestic workers and a black market economy that exists around the trade of recycled and off-cut material that's produced as a consequence of commerce and exchange. It was important to have a project and encounters that spoke to the circumstances and situations of Hong Kong directly and indirectly, and to have a project that excavates a narrative of that parallel economy is a good one to have in this space. Would you speak a bit to that project, Tintin?
Yes, okay, if I can.
Oh my gosh, your voice
Okay,
now.
let's see. Yeah, okay. I'll just have to find the correct frequency and just stay there. So forgive me if I sound like a robot. But yeah, so as Alexie has mentioned, my practice is largely about, it's about the border. And for a long time, I focus on geopolitical borders and seeing them as a space instead of a line. And because they're a space and they're actually inhabited by people, even though they're transitory, there are social interaction in those spaces. And so those were my focus for a long time. My work has been basically inspired by this border space. And object is really important because the objects are the ones that make connection happens. So this project, this work, 5 tons of homes and other understories, is part of a longer project called Trace Transit. So basically, it's a public intervention into a route of cardboard waste, as Alexie has described, around Central in Hong Kong. So it's really site-specific. It's really on the streets of Central, basically. And I've been, the last 2 years, I've been following this route. And I started, and how it came about was actually, I wanted to make a Hong Kong specific project. And when I thought about the Hong Kong specific project, the first thing I thought of was, what object could I focus on? Because I know if I focus on object, because people use things, it's people and things. It's never it's never things alone or people alone. They're always interwoven, basically. And so basically, I thought, okay, what was my first impression of Hong Kong? Well, what were my first impressions of Hong Kong? And one of them was the old people, elderly, usually pushing trolleys with cardboard boxes on top of it. They would go to recycling point, and in the recycling point, the trolley would be weighed, and they would be paid by weight, basically, and then the cardboard waste would go somewhere else, and I didn't know where it went. So basically, that one, and then the second impression of Hong Kong that I had was how the Filipino domestic workers in Central actually use cardboard waste to build their temporary shelter every weekend. And so I thought, okay, these are people and things, different groups that seem unrelated, basically, but I thought, okay, they're using the same object, and with different, they handle it very differently. So I thought, well, okay, this is my focus, and I'll try to focus there, and I'll try to see what links them, and then from there, actually, it becomes a bigger thing, and I've learned a lot during these 2 years, and I think transformed me quite a lot as well.
I would say, I mean,
Yeah.
there's a real intimacy in this work. For those of you who have not seen it, is the spiral of cardboard boxes that look as if they're being sort of delivered through the shipping terminals as you come into Hong Kong. And on each of these cardboard packages are these incredibly intimate drawings that have either been created by you or created in collaboration with the women. And you spend time in the homes of the women on their one day off a week, even when they're meant to be engaged in this kind of transaction and transformation of the cardboard in order to raise more money to send back to their families mostly and to contribute back to some sort of level of sustainability. There's this incredible humanity. So something that looks like a process of commodification and globalization is actually something that's kind of riven by an imagined other space. And within the drawings on those boxes, there's things that have moments of kind of quite profound and intimate human frailty. I mean, can you speak a bit to those relationships?
Yeah, my God, I mean, I'm just so overwhelmed by all the stories. Part of the reason my voice is like this is, because the first day after the press conference, well, a lot of people came to the work, and I just, I had to give them a tour, and I had to tell them each, like what the context was in which each of the drawing was drawn. And basically, so yeah, I have spent time, and time is also, time is very important in this project as well. So I've spent time with the Filipino domestic workers, basically every weekend when I'm here, and at first, I didn't know what I was gonna do, basically. So this project is really, like chance, chance.
A lightning flash, a spark, a random chance.
It was really produced until so the things, the bales of cardboard waste that you see upstairs, they're actually fresh from the streets of Central. Like last week, I was still drawing them. So yeah, yeah.
I think, I mean, I suppose just before we move on to Charles, I mean, something to think about in that process of creating this work is also that, that it isn't an endpoint. And something that's important in a space that a set of works like those that are represented within Encounters represent is that it is a speculative space. It's not an endpoint, and that contemporary art in these contexts and in something as kind of, as active as the market that is represented by Art Basel Hong Kong as a convergence of a different set of a range of communities and people who are collecting, people who are representing, galleries who are here to try and present work by their artists. But Osage Gallery committed to showing this project by Tintin because they realised that artists with socially engaged practices have a space within an institutional and collecting refrain in order to tell and collaborate in an ethical way with works that can then be represented through collections. And something you and I spoke about in February when I was here was the engagement of Art Asia, the Art Asia Archive in Hong Kong in this project, and having a not-for-profit with the esteem of Art Asia Archive involved in this is something that's quite important. And something else that I think that was quite important to both you and I in February was that at some point the women that you're working with, the Filipino workers, would have a chance to come to Art Basel Hong Kong to see the work in situ and not be excluded from that process of representation 10 minutes from their homes.
Yes. So yeah, and so basically we're gonna, and it's not only the Filipino domestic workers, but all the stakeholders, I would say, in the route. So basically well, I haven't managed to get a waste collector to come, but there is a researcher on waste collectors that would be able to share that part of the story. And then there is going to be the Filipino domestic workers and also the recycling point people, and hopefully the people at the port will be able to come as well. And that's going to be on the 26th of March at 4:30 in the Asia Art Archive platform, booth P9. So I hope you can join us as well.
You really must.
Yes.
But Tintin's voice is really going to run out of steam by 5 to 7. So I'm going to give her a few minutes to rest, because I think within each of these artists' works, the title of this panel is New Materialities, but something that is actually the material that each of these artists works with the most, beyond the materials of their works, which I think the way their works are realized is the materials that they deem to be most appropriate in that moment of resolving that work. They're not necessarily materials that they feel committed to or exclusively kind kind of, dedicated to working with. They adapt to materials through time, but the material that they are all committing most is time. And it's time through research, time through speculation, time through developing a proposition. And Charles Avery's project is a lifelong project. It's a project that I'm not sure has a beginning or has no clear predictive end in a sense. The Islander project is an extraordinary kind of, I'm going to describe it here, it's a lifelong project dedicated to describing the inhabitants of the Islanders, a place of flora, fauna, and a fictional environment. I love books. I grew up in a house where my father would put up bookshelves in your bedroom while you're at school for the day, and you'd come home and there'd be Celtic mythology or, solar systems, or, there'd be poetry. And you have a very committed artist book and drawing and text-based practice, but you also have a very strong sculptural and speculative practice. And the tree that is presented here is from the Jadin Dagadenda. Oh my God, he made up this word that I just can't say, and I'm mangling everything today. I mangled so many names in the last panel. But when Ingleby Gallery from Scotland said to me, we'd love to participate, what would you like? And before they'd finished, I said Charles Avery. And I'd seen images of this tree, which is one of the first of a number of sculptures that will be produced about the Jadin Dagadenda. I'm never going to say it again. I'll call it the Jabberwocky. But look, it'd be great to speak, because the work that we have here is this extraordinary and exquisite illuminated tree that was originally created for the Edinburgh Festival, but it's by no means an endpoint, this sculpture. It's actually is part of an ongoing interrogative, speculative environment of fiction and potential and self-determining imagination. Can you speak a bit?
Sure. I think I better give you just about 2 minutes of background on the project as a whole. I did originally allot 10 years to this project, but that has now elapsed, and I'm nowhere near even reaching what I would call critical mass. 10 years ago, I undertook to describe a fictional island in the form of drawing and text and objects. And the reason I did this was because I had been working in several different ways, and I had many different interests and pursuits. I liked writing, I loved drawing, but I needed a reason to do it. I wanted to make things, and my studio was a disorganized mess. And I felt that all these ideas were connected, but I didn't want to connect them intellectually because I felt that would be rigid. So I decided to create a space to put them in. So therefore their relations would become spatial, and that rapidly grew into the island, and then a desire to create a kind of not a pure system, but a devolved system by which the objects would gain meaning in relation to that. Before the meaning they attract when they go into the outside world. Now all artists have this issue, well, studio-based artists in particular, that when you're in the studio it is your perfect subjective realm, it is the embodiment of your mind. And then when things go out into the world, the work, it inevitably attracts new meanings. Now you have to rejoice in those new meanings and celebrate that. Nevertheless, I felt that the need to have this system underneath that, whereby with these arcane things, people would, if interested, perform a kind of archaeology on them that would reward them by taking them back into the system. It's a bit like if you took a chess piece off a chessboard, like the knight, for example, and you gave that a new meaning as, for instance, a wine saver. If you glued it to a cork and used it as a wine saver, then it has its new meaning, but it still carries its identity of the chessboard and the rules of the chessboard with it. Anyway, that was 10 years ago, and I'm here now. The island has become, I've worked on it very hard, I've gone down certain avenues, I've made lots of mistakes. The Islanders project, in a way, gives you the opportunity to make mistakes, and it takes the territory of art making back for thinking and for doing that. So.
You have described, I was just going to say, you have described the island as a stage, and that you are actually making the island
I'm
at the moment.
I'm coming onto the tree, don't worry. Now, I created a map for the island, I created a town, I'm building a town for it in my mind. The town is called Onomatopoeia. It's the gateway, it's the port and the gateway to the island. It's where all visitors would really come through. Now, the islanders, have a fear of nature as such, and it's and they built a great wall around to protect themselves from the wilderness, which is this great, very dangerous subjective wilderness. And so the town of Onomatopoeia represents this citadel of objectivity. And the Jardin de Gadenda is their municipal park within the town. And they have created this as a refutation of nature. So they've taken the characteristics of nature and they've used those, but the garden is eternal, the garden is sublime, it doesn't require any of those characteristics as a means of reproduction, it has roots for nutrition, but it doesn't require any of this. And they kind of designed it as a stage, as an epic stage. It would probably be about 3,000 or 4,000 square feet in area if I were to bring the whole garden about. And it would be a stage for symposiums, for dialogues, for one-act plays, a place of meditation and reflection for them. And the tree which I've made, which is out there, is a specimen from the garden. But the garden also represents a green zone between the subjective world of the island and the objective world. And a place where the two meet without compromising either. And I fear through the prism of mathematics, I'm able to sort of take some of that sublime feel. Obviously, mathematics is designed to be the least subjective thing, but also it seems for me to be a route to the sublime. So that is the principle behind the Jardin de Gadenda. But that's just one tree, so I've still got a whole garden to bring about somehow.
I think it's going to be 5:59 on Saturday afternoon that I actually pronounced for the first time Jardin de Gadenda correctly.
It's called the Jardin de Gadenda because I was in Paris when I thought of it, and I was sitting in a garden eating a sandwich, and I was thinking, shall I call it the Jardin de something? And I was thinking of garden, and then I put it all together, and I was thinking of the rerouting banyan trees in India, and I kind of wanted it to have a more kind of Indian feel, and I thought, and it kind of rolled into, and then it became Jardin de Gadenda, and it seemed it just seemed onomatopoeically appropriate. It seemed more sonorous and less sort of easy to say, which I liked.
I think it's perfect for, that really beautiful. It is, the sculpture itself feels like a three-dimensional drawing in space, and it has that drawing quality. And your drawings and your cartography and your writing, that process of intimate tracking and mapping, and you describe your studio as a kind of a messy place, but there's...
Well, that's quite true about it being a drawing. The whole Islanders project is really diagrammatic, by which I mean that when you draw, you only really answer half the stuff. You give the viewer the coordinates, you create a structure, but you don't actually, the subjective element is vital in animating those things. So if you draw a person sitting on a chair, I draw in a sort of fairly loose linear way, but if you draw a person sitting on a chair and you omit to draw the chair, it's not a problem. Whereas if it doesn't become about the lack of a chair, whereas if you draw, oh, hello, I'm speaking to the microphone there. If you draw, if you were to, for instance, on Photoshop, you were to have a picture of someone sitting on a chair, take a photograph, and then you remove the chair by trickery on Photoshop, then that picture becomes about the lack of a chair. Whereas when you draw that, it doesn't really become about that. If you only answer half the stuff, it doesn't become an issue, the lack of a chair. And it's the same with maps. Maps, you're giving people coordinates, you're giving them so they can get bearings, but you're not telling them where to go. You're just giving them the means to go there. And so that's what I see the whole Islanders project as being, an epic structure which will be the forum for other people's thinking, for other people's projections.
It's interesting with all three of you because there is a point of intimate departure, a point in a sense of kind of either direct encounter with, in your case, Brooke, the archive, the material and matter of history as it's accumulated through various passages and movements and migrations. And you have a very extensive archive of your own, and I've been lucky to be with you in Paris and China and to go to markets and to see you rifling, and you always find the ultimate treasures or the most inappropriate or kind of complicated images in any circumstance, and you have an instinct for those which is remarkable and inspiring. And I think, that intimate connection to that material with Tintin, that intimate connection to that personal space of research that deeply underpins the methodology of your work, but then the process of bringing those collaborators in, and with you, Charles, that process working in a very solitary way within the studio, but then at a certain point you have to relinquish in order for something like the tree to be realized. That's not a unilateral process of creation, that's a collaboration. So it'd be interesting to hear about how each of you work through that process, and maybe Brooke, from the intimacy of being embedded directly in contact with images and ideas through your archive to realizing a project at this scale.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that the interesting thing about archive is, like, we all might have an old photo of a grandmother or somebody, and, you know, there are stories about them regardless if you've met them or not, or something you're attracted to. It's not really in the past, it's in the present. It's about how we invest in that. And, you know, we have this thing in Australia where it's kind of... you know, the trauma sites in Australia, like the genocide sites, etc., there are no war memorials to the genocide of frontier wars. It's one different aspect of my practice, which I have a 3-year project for. The reason why I'm mentioning this in regards to archives is because I've seen many archives, like other people who work with archives, at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology at the Royal Anthropological Institute in London. Specifically that place, I've seen very early photographs of British anthropologists taking photos of Aboriginal people having sex, of their genitals, of bodies, of heads, of all of these sorts of things that are very confronting, and they're obviously clearly not the sort of things that I would be using in my work. I mean, I think that my work hints to that, but I think it's about this kind of form of censorship and our engagement in these histories, about how can they hint through, the practice, and about that thing about breaking amnesia or exposing or revealing, hints at subjects like that. And I don't know if it happens or not, because I'm in there and people are out there. And I often work with my mother, who helps me, connect with different elders and communities, and also other people like Marcia Langton, who's one of Australia's foremost Indigenous academics. And it's this sort of thing, like, having connections with communities that people might say, oh, that's an old photo, who cares about that anyway? But there are people today who are alive who, like I was saying before, who have never had those images before, and I'm working with the University of Vienna in their anthropological department at the moment, and a Viennese anthropologist, Rudolf Persch, visited Australia accidentally, and there's a whole set of images from a community from about 1880, different project. Those families I've been in contact with to send them the images, and it's about connecting with those families and those memories. That's not about my art project, it's a separate thing. So I think that's one thing that I find really inspiring. And then of course there's my own archive, which I collect, because the reason why I collect is, in most cases in museums, I can't use, or because of copyright issues, which is of course a farce. You're working with an 1850s image, or you can't use that because this library owns it. It's like, hang on, but if I go to, find an image, at a antique bookstore or a eBay or anywhere else, we can use it. So, but funny enough, there are also issues around censorship, copyright. The list goes on, and in some cases I've used images, and I've done extensive research and talked to anthropologists or researchers, and have found no information, and then 5 or 10 years later someone will come up to me and go, oh, actually, we found the information for that. That person is actually from here. So in some ways it's very complex but rewarding, I think. Yeah.
I think, within your work there is that personal subjectivity always, which is a kind of, again, a humanity and a vulnerability that's embedded within the work. And, thinking back to, you mentioned biography, working with your mother, or, I remember one of the first works I ever saw of yours was a neon pink boomerang installed on the exterior of a building in the centre of kind of Sydney's gay and lesbian community. And I remember seeing your mother on the Mardi Gras parade in Sydney, and your parents embracing your kind of, your life and your decisions and who you are. And I think, with the mise-en-scene upstairs, you're not flinching from representing contradiction. And I think in the way that you assemble and represent images to audiences is not about a kind of a didactic set of associations, but it's about a speculative space of understanding that these are still things which are determining the ways in which we encounter each other and perceive things. You speak yourself about seeing images and making assumptions that are incorrect. There's an image upstairs of an Indian woman, which, you know, you thought was something else altogether. You thought she was African when you first saw that image, and that mistake and the accountability and sense of ethics to understanding the origins of images is an important thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that we're all driven by that, we're all marked by that, and we're all surprised by that. And I think that it's a kind of a game. But also, I think, you know, when you talk about even the didacticism of that, I mean, it's so easy to say, oh, let's just put those images together. But it's this complexity. And it's like the little baby, you know, the season's greetings of the little American 1940s baby, you know, being sent out to, you know, we do that today. People with kids might send, you know, an email or a picture of their kids, and God, how many pictures of Santa Claus in my family have I got? But it's interesting because they're complex places of diaspora, which, you know, working in Paris at the moment and at the Musée de Quai Branly, and speaking with people who've had stories of migration. I'm also, you know, starting to speak with Syrian refugees in Paris, which is extraordinarily controversial and, you know, heartbreaking and unimaginable how this can happen, etc. But how they have an opinion on this archive, so that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the people that apparently don't matter for those who own the archive. 700,000 photographs in that archive from all places of the world.
Which you have to synthesize to 50 for your presentation.
Yeah.
And I might pick up on that point to go to Tintin, because how do you, when you're listening to these stories and having these encounters, and also you're intensive, you have a PhD actually looking at globalization, migration, and the implications of kind of the movements of people on the way that we think through the space that art may or may not occupy in terms of agency or engaging with politics as a significant space for that. Sort of the accountabilities and ethics of art trying to propose itself as a political space. So how do you work with synthesizing the stories that you're hearing and those relationships? I'm catching this into your work.
I think in my PhD it was always about, you know, like the concepts and the bigger things, the bigger images. You know, like I work with three objects from the borders, which is passports, walls, and maps, actually. And so I did a lot of game performances with them in which these objects are actually crucial for connections to happen. I think talking about space, this project in Hong Kong, it's about this route, right? So basically I actually go in and out of different spaces, actually, and within that, I have my own space as well. And so I have my personal space. And I guess as an artist, I mean, you know, like having this methodology of research, and in this case of this project, it's really, it's quite, it's like material culture studies, basically, you know, like studying, you know, the relationship between people and things. But then I think I am always aware that I, as an artist, is there. Like I am there. I might influence that space as well, and I come with my own space. And so basically, that's what I've been aware of. And actually, this well, okay, talking about the root again. This space that we're in, the Hong Kong Convention and Exhibition Center, this is actually one of the nodes. Well, okay, now it becomes one of the nodes in the cardboard waste route because my installation is up there. Basically, the route that I focus on is between Sheung Wan in Western Market in Sheung Wan. So there is a recycling point there. Between that's the furthest node, and the other end node is the port close to Chai Wan. We enter through Hang Fa Chuen, basically, where the cardboard waste bales are collected and stored there until it's ready to get shipped to China, to paper mills in China. And so between the recycling point in Sheungwan Central and Heng Fashion, this is actually the truck from the recycling point in Sheungwan actually passes by Hong Kong Art Center. So it's really physical, geographical as well. It's like it's the real space, but then at the same time there is a conceptual space of this intervention, basically. And when I was spending time with people in these different spaces, I'm always aware that it's me, like it's me as an individual, as an artist, engaging with them. And so I'm not trying to be invisible or anything. It's because it's impossible. I don't think it's possible to be invisible. And it's, I mean, how can I be invisible if I interact with them? So, yeah. And
I think I might just pick up at that point, because I think that idea of a passage and a series of points at which you kind of enter and exit a set of ideas or associations, and that concept of meeting points is a really important one. And I would also add that I hope that we will contribute to your recycling with the Richard Malloy work at the conclusion of Art Basel Hong Kong, which is the yellow work, Big Yellow, created by Richard Malloy just at the end of this. So I hope that we'll be able to invest something back in the economy of that particular community. But with Charles, you speak about the Jardin d'Agadenda. I'm going to give it up. I swear I'm going to give it up. I'm going to give it up.
The garden.
Yeah, the jardin, okay, the jardin. I keep persevering and humiliating, but that's okay. Look, I think, you described the tree, and something when I spoke with Florence and Richard from Ingleby, they described the tree also as coming from that garden and the meeting place. And I just wonder, when realising a work from drawing or the maps that you're creating through to collaborating to realise the sculpture and form, and watching something from this space migrate into different communities and encounters, speaking a bit to that process.
Okay. As I said, the whole contrast between, or the whole duality between the subjective and the objective, is a current that runs right throughout my work. When I first conceived of the Islanders project, and I decided that the island was to represent the world of all ideas, I immediately had a structural problem, because I had these tourists coming to the island, but they had to be coming from somewhere. And if this island represented the world of all ideas, it also needed to represent the idea of outside. So the outside had to be on the inside, and if it was inside, then it wasn't the outside. So I had to create another country, which was annoying, because it's hard enough to create one place, but I have to invent another. So nominally I called this other country Triangle Land. And Triangle Land was the other place. That's where everyone came from, and it became a kind of colonial metaphor in a way. I'm digressing slightly, but I'll come back to the point at some point. I became very much aware of the colonization of the world of ideas. And when you are a young artist and you start off, you're like, you might be 18, 19, 20 years old, full of elan, and you tend to think you're the first person to have thought of a lot of things, and then you do something, you make a proposition of some sort, and then somebody says, people are always telling me, oh, you should really look at this, you should really read this. And then if you do follow that up, you come to realize that people have been thinking about these issues, especially these sort of very intractable ideas of philosophy, for thousands of years, and that everybody has been thinking about everything. Not only that, but this territory of ideas has been demarcated, and people have put flags in it, and people have, like, for instance, evolution belongs to Darwin, but it doesn't. But nevertheless, there's so many different cultures and societies have contributed to that idea, and individuals, and not least other individuals at the time when Darwin was producing that. Nevertheless, that belongs to him. So, and then you're suddenly forced to refocus. You have to find yourself a new role as an artist within that already kind of carved up territory. And so that is brings me to now, when my decision was to sort of create a sort of new road as a traveller through that territory. And every individual, every subjective being takes their own equally valid path through that territory. the garden, as I say, as this place where I felt I could have something utterly objective achieved with the immutability of metal, with the immutability of pure mathematics, was a place where I felt that a meeting point could happen. And I did see that. I used the word green zone quite kind of deliberately as a sort of as a sort of political idea. Now I've kind of forgotten the original question.
That's all right. I think we only have a few moments left. And are there any questions from the audience as well? Just because I could sit here listening to these artists, but are there any questions out there from any of you at all? I can't see you really from up here. No, Stephanie's shaking her head. Look, I think that original question for me to you, and I suppose there's something that just listening to the three of you, and I know we have to wrap up soon because I'm getting that look from the organisers, but there's a beautiful quote from Jean-Luc Godard, which is a total segue at this point and, nothing to do with anything. But I just remembered this quote listening to you, and the quote is, "It's not necessary to recreate the world, it's only necessary to create the possibility of a world." And just, in that point of possibility in the worlds in which you either create through encounter, through speculation, through the archive, or through fiction, or through creating an altar, what are the possibilities going forward for you with the projects that you're undertaking? What happens next, I suppose? I'm going to go to Tintin. Mix it up.
Mix up the order.
Mix up the order.
Well, that was a surprise question. Anyway, okay. Well, I am actually, this project is still ongoing until, I can say that it's going to finish, I have to finish in October, basically, when another project is going to start. So basically, in October, I'm going to have a residency in the Hyde Park Art Center in Chicago. And I'm thinking to use the same methods, basically, still basically thinking of people and things, and different groups of people using the same thing in different ways, and try to find the connections between them. Basically, that's the method that I'm really interested in at the moment. This project, though, so the fact that Art Basel Hong Kong is now part of the cardboard waste route. The fact that installation is there, the fact that the bales fresh from Central. The streets of Central are there, actually opens up also other questions. Like as an installation in an art fair, it opens up a possibility of it being preserved rather than going back to recycling. So yeah, I'm really like every night I'm asking myself this question, also because there are just so much memories in it, and even the ladies where I with whom I spend my time and with whom I draw and translate their stories and tell stories to them as well. Sometimes they didn't want to part with the walls that I drew. And now I can really understand that, because where does this go after this? The original plan is that it goes to the port, and then I will say that's what I've been doing this last year, basically say bye to them in the port. And now now that there's there's something else. There are other people here as well coming with their stories, listening to the stories of people in the other nodes. I think that's a good point. And maybe Brooke, I'm going to go to you. What's happening now? What happens next?
With that?
Yeah, after you eat your empire.
It was actually called Building Empire, and I had this dream when there were all these pieces of little things, and I ate them. And it was a really liberating dream, because, that's what it is, isn't it? It's eating empire. And it's interesting, Charles, you mentioned Darwin. What if, Darwin's dead. The way in which that history was made around that was devastating. The way in which that he was misunderstood is devastating. And it was an excuse for so much genocide and so much ignorance. It's extraordinary that, creating fake islands or, working with people who people don't often care about is extraordinary. And, it's not about guilt, it's not about fear. So, I think that the future of this building, eating empire is growing on that, making it bigger here, as far as, what is the multiplicity of that? It is a hall of mirrors, it's the kind of what is mirrored out and mirrored back as a humanity, which I think is quite self-obsessed. And I often think about, issues of our impact on the environment, which is of course the whole thing at the moment. It's like, what we should be really thinking about. But if I go back to Indigenous cultures or other cultures who are connected to those important aspects, or if you live on an island, or if you, kind of live close to, the impact of, if it's recycling or, have to move away from your families. I mean, I think it's about responsibility. It's about being a responsible kind of, conscious being on this planet. I mean, that's, I think how I'm going to grow
just those
that.
things.
Just
those small things.
Just a few things.
And so I need to understand, Charles, I'm going to finish with you, the responsibility. You've created not one country but two. You have these islanders over whose dominion you have accountabilities that are both awe-inspiring and quite gobsmacking. So what happens with the island? And you did mention yesterday that you are going to be beginning to build part of the island on an island.
Well, yeah, I'm building a jetty on Mull, and I'm from an island, from the island of Mull in the Hebrides of Scotland originally, and I designed an emigrants pier within the fiction, inspired by a particular geographical location on Mull. And we got planning permission to build, actually. I thought it'd be a nice form to actually build, and I wanted the actual fiction to inform reality as opposed to the other way around. So that kind of trade has gone full circle. So that's one thing which is entirely funding dependent. But the islanders as a whole, I mean, it's like trying to bring together an epic novel. I have all the assets, I have some of the assets, I'm trying to organize them, I'm trying to figure out a structure that's just meaningful, so that it's not just an A to Z of a place, but more than that. And I have an idea about that structure, but it is a struggle, and it's one that sometimes I feel I'm winning, sometimes I feel I don't. When the project's going well, it's a wonderful freedom of the universe, and when it's going badly, I just think I'm not thinking about what will happen next. I'm thinking, just God, when will it end? But yeah. And as for the garden, that's something else that I've just got to try and bring about. That's a very public-facing work. I feel it's kind of architectural in its conception, and I feel that it somehow belongs in the public realm. So that's.
I love that tree. I keep on sitting on the edges of the tree, on the plinth, on the edge of the tree.
I'm glad you're sitting on it. Encourage people to do so.
I'm sitting on it, and I'm just chatting about ideas. But look, all three of these artists are extraordinary and generous in ways that I find incredibly humbling. All four of us come from an island. We all come from different islands, but we're meeting at an island. But, no artist is an island. And, to that end, I would please encourage you to go to Ingleby Gallery, to Osage Gallery. But look, and Brooke Andrew, supported by Natalie Obadia, and Talano Galleries, and Tintin, supported by Osage. Please go to their galleries. I think Tintin's work, Brooke's work, and Charles's works, if you know someone who can collect them for their public spaces, museums, or institutions, then please encourage them to go and visit those spaces. I can say that I'm a curator. I want to advocate for artists to lead with risk and experimentation and bold ideas that can find a place in our collections and endure for audiences to encounter through time. I thank them for their time, I thank them for their generosity, and I thank them for the commitment to making the kinds of works that we can find a space for in this encounter. Thank you. Please give them a round of applause.